Assalamualaikum and selamat sejahtera to Doctor. Today we are going to present about experiment 5, that is frictional force. These are our group member that consists of Adila Rashada, Nur Kamarina, Nurul Fatasha and Nurul Imafintri. The objective of this experiment is to determine the coefficient of static friction of different surfaces. Next, we are going into the theory of this experiment. Normal force is a contact force that acts in the normal direction or perpendicular to the contact surface between two objects. Friction is the force that resists the relative motion of one surface in contact with another. There are two types of friction. There is static friction and kinetic friction. The picture in the slide shows that normal force is equal in magnitude to the gravitational force, that is mg. Next, like I said, friction has two types of friction. There are two types of friction. One is static friction. Static friction is the friction that acts on an object that is at rest. Static friction is the force that must be overcome in order to move a static object. The maximum value of static friction force is given by F as max equals to coefficient of static friction times weight, normal force.
So the third theory is kinetic friction is the friction that acts on moving object, and the kinetic friction of force is given by the formula, which the kinetic friction is equals by the coefficient of kinetic friction times the normal force of friction. First, static friction. Second, sliding friction. And third, rolling friction. As you can see in this slide, these are the apparatus that we used in the lab. First is wooden block. Second is 50-gram masses. Third is 10 Newton spring scale. Fourth is string. And fifth is tabletop. Here are our procedures in the experiment 5. First, the mass of wooden block was measured and recorded as m. Next, the tabletop was made sure stable and horizontal to the ground. Furthermore, the spring scale and wooden block was attached with a string. Next, m equals to 50-gram mass was placed on the wooden block. Next, the spring was pulled slowly. The spring scale reading was recorded when the block starts to move. The value fx was recorded. Next, step 4 until 5 was repeated for 3 trials. Furthermore, another 50-gram mass was added on wooden block, and step 5 to 6 was repeated. The steps was repeated until total of m equals to 500 grams was on wooden block. And last but not least, step 1 until 8 was repeated. The rubber side of block was made sure facing upward.
For the analysis question number 3, use the gradient obtained from the graph to calculate coefficient of static friction for each surface. For the rubber, 4.007 minus 2.67 over 6.23 minus 4.27 equals to 0.61. For non-rubber, 3.53 minus 1.73 over 8.19 minus 4.28 equals to 0.46. Application number 4. Compare and discuss the coefficient of static friction obtained. Coefficient of static force of the first result is higher than coefficient of static force of the second result. The higher the static friction, the higher the coefficient of static friction.
How can anti-lock car brakes stop a car in a shorter distance than regular brakes? ABS is anti-lock braking system that prevents the wheels from locking up during emergency braking. Without ABS, the wheel will slide because it has a lesser friction applied on it. When the car hits an emergency brake, the car will stop quickly as the amount of friction applied on the tires are large, hence slowing down on the kinetic friction and slowing the car in a shorter distance. From your experiment, which material has the highest coefficient of static friction? Does this agree with your hypothesis? What do you think determines the coefficient of static friction? Coefficient of static force of the rubber has the highest coefficient of static friction, which agree to my hypothesis. Rubber has low elastic modulus compared to non-rubber, which can affect the coefficient of static friction. Once the mass begins to slide, does it move smoothly or does it undergo stop and go motion? Explain the motion. The mass begins to slide by undergoing step and go motion. The motion stops because there was friction applied on the motion, thus making the velocity of the object moving decreasing. For the conclusion, based on this experiment, the coefficient of static friction on different surfaces was determined. The coefficient shown on each of the surfaces differs from the other. The higher the applied force, the higher the critical force needed to overcome it and make the wooden block move.